as well because I scroll really easily. So because of that, I tend to be a little bit more classroom style, I guess. Unless I'm doing specific styles, if I'm doing specific content, then I have like discussion patterns, right? Or discussion panels. But that's if I'm talking about Indigenous things, I'm not going to be a voice that talks about Indigenous things. Mainly I'm Indigenous, but I am also aware of the I would get in trouble if I said this. There are more Indigenous people. There are people who are way more Indigenous than I am, right? Like there are people who are more connected and have more right to speak on subjects. And so I would definitely bring up a panel of voices then, because it's not my space to speak on. It's my space to uplift and allow others. I could speak on intersectionality, but not on, I can also speak on being Indigenous, but I also feel that it is more appropriate while speaking on being Indigenous to have people who have tighter connections to community to speak on the subjects as well. So those are usually the only discussion panels I have. Let me see if I can get this to turn on. What? Me trying to talk when I have different things going is weird. Especially when they won't work. Okay, we're just going to do that. Ha 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 ha. Well, when I was speaking about Indigenous just now, I was specifically speaking about the Western Hemisphere, Turtle Island and Abya Yala. I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm specifically speaking about Turtle Island and Abya Yala. But my indigeneities are pretty global. I call myself globally mixed because there's not a continent I don't have ancestry and ties to by both genealogy, as in tracing lines, and DNA. And so that's what I meant about I'm Indigenous, yet there are people who are much more connected, and then therefore they have a right to speak over me on subjects, right? I would not speak over them on subjects, right? Well, everyone is mixed. When I speak, my indigeneity is beyond just blood ties, right? Like it's not just about having ancestry in a specific space. It's also about connection. It's also about interaction. It's also about how you work within community. Do you work for community, right? There are a lot of things that go about with being Indigenous. So, and not everybody is extremely mixed. Some people are way more mixed than others. It always makes me think of one of my very first memories where I was privileged as a toddler to grow up in Indigenous communities and was born in Indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest. And I was privileged enough to learn from elders first. And when I remember the stories of those teachings, I remember Seventh Fire, Seventh Generation, the prophecies that talk about when the seventh generation comes, these children who are extreme, everywhere, right? All the different corners and all the different peoples coming together to actually, there's many different teachings within it, and I don't, it's not one that I teach. So, but many different people coming together to create a generation of children who are mixed, right? So I think that that's important too. And it's, valid and a part of who I am. But I'm saying but a lot today. And I'm saying but a lot today because I'm in a lot of pain. And when I am in a lot of pain, my brain does not function as easily as it should. And so I apologize for that. Yeah. And all I was saying with it is I can speak for intersectionality, but I would rather not speak for specific nations. So I would bring panels in. And they're me saying it much better than I was saying it earlier. So let's go ahead and talk since I've got pages up and everything else. The 1 second, let me see if I can fix the live stream on YouTube because it is a little bit weird right now. 1 second, everybody. I apologize if your thing just went weird on YouTube. Why will it not share a time? It will not let me pick this. No. Mm-hmm. There it is. Technologically challenged. So when we are when we're looking at Western agriculture, specifically what we're talking about with Western agriculture is monocrop agriculture. And this is the agriculture that we see a lot throughout the United States. It's the agriculture that we see really a focus of a lot throughout the planet, right? As today is, or rather in today's time. When we're looking at monocrop agriculture, what monocrop agriculture does is it pulls everything that's in the land out of the land, and then it places something new down. Thank you so much, love. It places a single crop down. This agriculture really arises along the Nile River. The oldest papers that I've been able to find, and I'll have to find them again so I can post them up, but the oldest information that I've been able to find is about 18,000 years ago along the Nile. Now, one thing that many people don't understand about the Nile is that the Nile's yearly flood that used to happen before they dammed it up would actually refertilize the ground along the Nile every year. And in that refertilization along the Nile every year, monocrop agriculture really actually worked, right? There weren't a lot of plants that would work within this yearly flood zone, basically. And there was a re-nutrient of the soil every year. So if you're just planting one crop, it's going to get all the nutrients it needs. And the flooding also would provide the ability to provide irrigation, right? So when they're first starting monocrop agriculture along the Nile, and people take this and they move this out, they're moving it out along rivers. The problem is in a lot of places, as they're moving this out along rivers, they're not moving it along rivers that actually have a yearly flooding pattern. That yearly flooding pattern being so important in replacing the nutrients to the soil. So we see that about 14,000 years ago, you start to see in what we call today the Near East, the Levant area or the Arabian Peninsula, right? In this space, you start to see what we've thought of for a long time as the Fertile Crescent, right? What's taught as the Fertile Crescent. It's also, taught as the Garden of Eden. This specifically which is up along the, not on the Arabian Peninsula, but up along the northern portion of the Arabian Peninsula, the northeastern portion as it's connecting to Asia. So in that space, my dog is very licky right now. In that space, in the Fertile Crescent, we see that there was a lot of nutrient within the soil, and there was a lot of irrigation. My words today, I apologize. There was a lot of irrigation ability in that space. And because there was a lot of irrigation ability in that space, they're keeping that, the crops are able to grow. They're walking into very fertile zones. That's what I want to say with it. Because there's a there's a lot of irrigation, there's a lot of river flow through the area at that time, the crops are able to grow in that area before they introduce monocrop agriculture. And the crops are able to grow are not necessarily the crops, but the different parts of the biome are able to grow at this time because of the fact that you're getting a lot of irrigation through the rivers, and the biome itself, its interactions actually provides fertilization. It actually provides nutrients. It actually provides the different things needed to grow, to thrive as a plant, right? And this is one of the things that monocrop agriculture just kind of get rid of. And in its getting rid of that, it causes the climate destruction. Now we see that our very first cities are in these areas, and they're in these areas about 9,000 years ago. 9,000 years ago, we see the very first iteration of the, it's not there. And I've said it 100 times in here, and I'll know it in a couple of minutes. We see the city rise about 9,000 years ago. And this city has many different iterations. It has come back many times. We see that its first rise was roughly 300 years. And the reason that it ended in its first rise was because they were using monocrop agriculture and husbandry of herds along this area. Well, and I'm in pain right now. And so when I'm in pain, I'm obviously on some medication, and my brain doesn't function as well from the pain, and my brain doesn't function as well from the medication. And I, like the PTSD kind of stuff that I have, I've always been very vocal, but the PTSD that I have silenced me. And so it's really hard sometimes for my words to work. And I'll like stutter, and I didn't start stuttering until my 40s. But the PTSD will cause me to drop words or stutter. And so I'm like, blah, blah, let me add all of this in. But I'm really trying to figure out what's wrong with the freezing on TikTok and try and find ways that I can actually come on that aren't freezing, which so far on the tablet today, it seems to be not freezing. And so I'm trying to go live at least occasionally so that I can do that. It's joyful for me to actually be able to do stuff, right? Like, so absolutely much joy for me as well. And thank you so much for, the spirit and the love and the, being willing to listen. Right? So when we see that monocrop agriculture is rising in what we call the Fertile Crescent, or where today is Iraq, right? When we see monocrop agriculture rising in this, we see that it's taken it away from the place that it actually works along the Nile. And it's removing the entirety of the biome. Now, a biome like us, like we're part of the biome. A biome is something that in every instance, what we think of when we look, or not, a biome means a whole, basically. A biome is the whole of the earth. This is because I'm not feeling well too. The biome is the whole of the earth. The biome is the whole body is your biome. The whole of your environment. Your house is a biome. Your tub is its own biome, right? A biome is a space and all of the different living things within that space, be it bacteria, be it human, right? Like all of the living things within that space is what a biome is. Bran, that's enough. So when we look at the biome within the Fertile Crescent, we're seeing that the biome was thriving in that space because of extensive irrigation and the cross crops, right? The different plants that would grow together, the different animals that would grow together, like anything else is developed by the biome around it. We talk about human speciating in the biome, and the biome, the adaptations that we make to the biome are what create new species. This is the same with plants. This is the same with animals. The adaptations to the needs of the environment is what creates a new species, whether the need of the environment is a predator or prey, whether it's a plant, whether it's a bug, whether it's more soil, right? The needs of the biome create the species within the biome, right? Because species adapt to thrive in the biome that they are indigenous to. So when we see that along the Fertile Crescent and along all these rivers, small farms are working. Single sustenance living situations are like small communities where they're doing a little bit of farming, more in a settled hunter-gatherer style with a couple of crops that they're planting. This seems to work. And this seems to work from about 14,000 years up until about 9,000 years ago. These dates are all like 1950. So it's longer now, but we're still just going with those dates. So because what they do when you're looking at archaeological texts, you're going to see BYA. I think it's BYA. I haven't looked at it in a while. And it is before current date, basically, before the current year. And the current year is 1950. So everything that it says like BY, it is BYA. Oh, my brain. Sorry, no, I have to know. Before presence, BP. Anything that says BP is before present, but present is 1950. So these dates are this before 1950. So at 9,000 years ago, before 1950, we see that the single crop or the small communities that are doing a single crop in accent to their gathering and into light husbandry, like a community might have, a few sheep for a community of 30, or it might have, a couple of goats for a community of 30, right? and you think of maybe an acre of grain to make, well, maybe a little bit more, but an acre, some land of grain to make bread, and you don't have these vast swaths of the biome being ripped out. So you still have other parts of the biome that are able to interact, to give nutrients, to refertilize, and to allow these small communities who are moving monocrop agriculture from the Nile, where of course it works, to the Fertile Crescent, where we're not seeing so much of the yearly flooding in all these zones. There are some zones in the Fertile Crescent that I do believe around this time between 14,000 years ago and 9,000 years ago that we are actually seeing yearly flooding. Things like, and this is on the opposite side of the Fertile Crescent, but we still see it today. The Red Sea is actually almost and it's off the Nile, so that's a part of the yearly flooding, but it also has a yearly flood through there. And I do believe, if I remember correctly, but geology is not my thing, that at that time we're seeing some spaces where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet have some yearly flooding, right? So along those spaces, this is going to still work. But when we're moving it out from these spaces and we're moving it into spaces that you don't have the yearly flood of nutrients, if you're ripping everything out of the ground, you're losing the nutrients for the plants that you're trying to grow. Now, between 14,000 and 9,000, we're seeing small communities around 30 to 60, maybe even a little bit larger, but we're not seeing huge swaths of land being taken, and we're not seeing anything that we would think of today as cities. Around 9,000 years ago, we start to see our first city based on agriculture. I had it. En Gazel, that's it. En Gazel, along the river Jordan in, I think En Gazel is actually over closer to Iraq, where the river Jordan flows over that way, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Again, geographically challenged. That's something I was looking up the other day when I was talking about indigeneity into space over there for different groups who are absolutely indigenous compared to other groups who came from Iraq and seem to think that instead certain areas along the sea over there belong to them instead. So En Gazel being our first city, we see that En Gazel in its first iteration only lasts about 300 years. And the reason that it only lasts about 300 years is they go from taking these small communities of farming and they bring them into one space, and they basically clear out the bottom land along a river. And they are using the river to irrigate. They're using this fertile valley for their city, and they're using the hills and land around them to herd their animals, right? And because they have such a vast number of people in such a small space, all living off of these crops and these animals, they have a vast number of crops and a vast number of animals. Now, you can support a vast number of people on a smaller space of land if you work with the biome, if your interactions with the biome are to tend the biome, are to ensure the growth of the biome instead of ripping everything out to plant your singular crop, right? But when you rip everything out and replace everything with a singular crop, what you do is you start that destruction of the biome. I mean, it's a very big destruction initially anyways. If you're ripping out these vast swaths of land and there's no other animals, plant life, bug life coming into the soil, the plants are growing in that soil are leaching from the soil. If you're not having anything replace the leached nutrients out of the soil, you'll get crops that last for a few years, and then you have to figure out either rotation or you have to figure out refertilization, right? So between the fact that their animal husbandry is basically eating everything in the vast hills around the city, and their crops are basically ripping everything out and destroying the valley along the river, we see the En Gazel causes climate destruction in this space in a 300-year period. So when we talk about Western agriculture causing climate destruction, this is what it is. It needs to be understood that it is not just the animals, it is the plants as well. And it's not just the plants, it's the animals as well. And it's not eating meat, right? Whether or not you eat your meat isn't going to save climate destruction, right? It is animals who are housed in an extremely small space, often in their own feces, often never really seeing the light of day, that are really being tortured. That's no tending to me, right? There's no love in that, right? That does no good for anybody. And it is crops that literally rip everything out and replace it with a single thing, and can only refertilize by putting vast amounts of chemicals, right? Because even if you're going with fertilizer that's coming straight off of a cow, there's so many chemicals going in that at this point, right? We see actually that this happened within the southwestern United States, like the California land, like Nevada and stuff like that. We see that these great swaths of prairie were these great swaths of prairie were teeming with life, right? And we see the root structures go down like 6 feet into the ground. And those root structures hold all the dirt, right? All the soil. And we see all the animals that are interacting with this. And we see all the bugs, right? We see the different plants that are interacting with this. And we see documented, I mean, because I'm in the process of moving things around, Tending the Wild is not out here. You can see that indigenous people to California have documented, and you see that people coming in initially, or the Europeans initially coming in colonization, document these vast prairies that are teeming with life. So what Western agriculture did was it came in and it ripped up those vast prairies teeming with life, because this is obviously such a fertile space. Wheat's roots only go down a few inches, right? Like maybe a couple feet your most, but that's a maybe, right? It doesn't go down very far, right? All of the different monocrop agriculture that they're putting in, or that they put in, because it really caused problems, didn't have the root system it needed to hold that soil in place when the winds come through, right? And we talk about how it turns into, and I think it's from Kansas over, turns into a dust bowl, right? Where you have no root system holding anything in place. You have gotten rid of all the plant and the animal life. You've replaced it with monocrop agriculture. Your soil is starting to fail because you can't refertilize it, you know, and then you see that the root systems in the plants that you already have aren't enough to hold the soil down. And I do believe that what we're looking at is the Midwest, not Midwest, Kansas, like it's swath down the middle, but the lower swath down the middle. When I'm talking about the Dust Bowl, right? I do believe that California has a totally different reason that it's turned into that space, and that has to do with water. My geography, again, is shit. Every day, I know it's the prairies. My geography is shit every day, right? So a race is a debunked theory. It is a colonial construct. Racism still exists, and most structures that we have in today's world are built on racism. And I can prove to you that they are built on racism because every single one of your founding fathers participated in eugenics. They built a structure to keep them on top and to keep everybody else down. They appropriated a constitution from a beautiful democratic society. And in appropriating that constitution, actually stole the Constitution, because they stole the actual writing of the Constitution, the wampum that was the writing of the Constitution. They stole that and they appropriated it to create a foundation that in its foundation, in its initial writing and in everything, coming from it since then has worked to keep anybody who is darker than me down, right? To either genocide a whole people or to breed a whole people to keep them enslaved, right? So racism is a huge part of the system, in any system that you've probably had contact with. We do see that there are systems that were built in very egalitarian processes that stayed very egalitarian through the racist structure that has come in or tried to take over with the colonial construct. Yet they're definitely not the United States, Canada, Mexico, anything in the Western Hemisphere. We do see that there are spaces across the globe that have removed their colonial governments. And in removing their colonial governments, there's always the hope that they're replacing their colonial governments with non-racist structure societies, right? Yet that does not mean that is happening, because is it up there? Is it up there? It is not. Oh, yes, it is. Violence is 10,000 years old, because violence ties into Western-based agriculture, monocrop agriculture. Because as those first cities are forming, we see that those first cities in their forming needed a way to keep somebody up in charge and somebody down below getting dirty. And so we see that our first kings are God kings, right? Who have gathered together all the bullies in the neighborhood to bring everybody together to make people work for them, make people do the labor for them. And the way that they have made people do the labor for them is protection rackets. The mob is 10,000 years old. It's protection rackets. It's, you need me to keep you safe from the barbarians in the hills who are going to steal your food. And because you need me to keep you safe from the barbarians in the hills who are going to steal your food, you need to give me 90% of your food so that I can feed my armies to keep you safe underneath my thumb. Right? So this is othering. Othering starts 10,000 years ago, and it starts with our first cities. And it is very, very, very much about keeping the hierarchy in place, right? It is very much about the hierarchical system and the need to keep me in charge of you so that I can live in the lap of luxury while you are struggling and starving. We see that our first cities also cause disease, like a great deal of disease, packing a bunch of people into a tight space with no irrigation. Even today with irrigation and garbage systems like sewer systems, all that sort of stuff that we have, not irrigation, sanitation. Again, my words. Even today with sanitation and all the different systems we have in a city, cities are rife with disease. You get disease living in cities, and you get disease living in cities because of the close quarters, right? As well as any lack of sanitation, any lack of, feeding, these different things. So I need to keep you in check. I have to have something that you're afraid of so that you give me control over you. I have to have something that I'm protecting you from. The bear. Okay. I have to have something I'm protecting you from so I can keep control of the situation. Okay. And because I have to have something I can protect you from to keep control of the situation, we see the start of othering. Othering starts with the barbarians in the hills. And then othering becomes, my brain's not here right now. So hold on a second and let me make sure I'm getting it as accurate as I can. We see first the barbarians in the hills, and then we start to see other cities. So as everybody's forming into cities, you got cities in Ur, and you've got cities across, the desert. And as everybody's forming into cities, wars are happening between cities because I, as queen, often there were many queens in their own right, I, as queen, am keeping my control over you by telling you that other city, that other nation is trying to take our good stuff, right? Whatever our good stuff is, they want it. So I get you against that other nation. And so we have wars between cities, right? Now, after we have the wars in between cities, we start to see this rise of othering based on perceived gender, perceived biological sex, right? Of course, biological sex at this time is only so perceived, right? Because biological sex has very little to do with your external organs. So well, not very little, can be very different than your external organs might demonstrate. Okay, so because of this, we start to see this othering based on whether or not you're male or female, right? And we start to see this really in ancient Greece, right? This is our first othering based on being a woman compared to being a man, right? This is the first time we see othering keeping you down within society as opposed to between societies, right? So we see this othering based on biological sex or perceived biological sex coming in ancient Greece. And then we start to see othering based on religion when we start to see Christianity really taking over the globe and really deciding that they're the shit, right? They are shit, but you know. So when we see this starting to take over the globe, we start to see othering based on religion. And after we see othering based on religion, and it is important to note that 1300, 1200, othering based on perceived skin color or genotype is very low, right? Is not really there, right? Othering based on religion, so ethno-religious othering, yes, right? An ethnicity that is their religion, absolutely. But othering based on the color of your skin doesn't happen. We start to see a shift when we're starting to see Africa itself has very advanced science compared to Europe. The reason Africa itself has very advanced science compared to Europe and the Arabian Peninsula has very advanced science compared to Europe is because these places were not Christianized. And because these places were not Christianized, Islam has a tendency to support the quest of knowledge, right? Islam is very big on the quest of knowledge. And so they didn't outlaw science and they didn't outlaw medicine within Islamic countries. And so we start to see this shift of looking at Islamophobia as a shift into skin color, just starting. And then around that time frame, 1492, as we all know, we see that. So within the Islamophobia thought process and the shift of color, or the shift of othering based on skin color within the Islamophobia process, what we're seeing is, I don't like your religion because I think your religion is evil. So I'm going to then transfer that into your skin color. When we see people landing from Europe here in the Turtle Island, well, actually in Abiyala in 1492, what we see is this acknowledgement that you can't equate evil to these people who are giving and loving and naive in your mind, right? Because that's how they write about them. Naivety was not there. We see that there are many nations who did not have the concept of SA, right? We see that there are many nations that did not have the concept of that with them, because anybody who would do that would be expelled from the nation. So we do see a lot of, I would state, I can, like, the naivety that they're talking about is really just an innocence of thought process, because it's not something that would be accepted within their culture and society, right? So because we see Europeans looking at Abiyala indigenous people going, they are too kind and innocent, and they're not evil. There's no way that they could be evil. It did freeze, didn't it? Hmm. I apologize. TikTok hates me. Let me see if I can get it back. Let me see if I can get it back. Yay. Sorry, everybody. TikTok hates me right now. And it's not even a live ban like I expect the live ban. So, because let me recenter. We were talking. Okay, so when we see that Europeans arrive in Abiyala in 1492, the European arrival in Abiyala in 1492, they're already starting to have this association of color with religion and taking their religious othering and putting it into a skin tone based othering. When they get to Abiyala, they cannot call people who they believe are naive and innocent evil. They talk about the Taino people as being very close to God. You know, even in the Constitution, the term is noble savage. Please don't use that second word, right? I'm just stating what's in the Constitution. That is an incorrect word to be using. So we see that there is this understanding that the indigenous people of Abiyala and the indigenous people of Turtle Island are very close to nature. There's not evil that they can even call within them, right? So, and that does not mean all nations are, absolutely innocent. We know that there are nations that, rivaled the Balian sacrifices in the Middle East, right? We know that there are nations who did things that, we're not innocent and naive, right? Can't expect everybody to be monolithic. That's not how the world works, right? So when they come in contact with people that they cannot perceive as being evil, they have to find another way to other. It's no longer based on religion, and it really deepens down on othering based on the color of the skin, right? So in the othering based on the color of the skin, we see that this really just deepens and deepens. And we see that from 1492 on up until the realization of evolution, the realization that Christianity isn't the be all end all, right? That Yahweh and the Torah are not the be all end all, right? The understanding of that in the mid 1800s with Darwin's theory of evolution, with the discovery of the first Neanderthal, we see that they can no longer use the Bible to justify it, because up until that point, they're using the Bible to justify this othering based on skin tone. They actually call it and I think it's Ham, right? The grandson. No, it is Ham. It's Noah's son, right? It is a mark. The dark skin, having darker skin is a mark within the biblical lore at this time to try and other those who have darker skin tone. In the 1800s, they start to develop the colonial construct of the theory of race. Now, my field developed this theory. My field is who debunked this theory. My field is trying to make sure that it's actively debunked, at least the majority of us. We're still dealing with our own racism in the structure, right? There's so much racism in the structure. So the reason that we debunked the theory of race, let me give that to you first, and then I will tell you about how the theory of race was scientifically structured. The reason that the problems within it. The reason that we debunked the theory of race is when they started doing the Whole Genome Project. The Whole Genome Project takes DNA from people around the globe. And then in taking the DNA from around the globe, they look at how many genes are in the human genome, right? And they get a picture of what the whole of the human genome is. And when they can get the picture of what the whole of the human genome is, and they start to look at it, they realize a couple things. The first thing that they realize is that among the Kwe population, a community of South Africa, all the human genomes are present. Every gene within the human body, every gene that it can possibly come out of a human Homo sapiens is in the Kwe population of South Africa. They also realize that there is more genetic diversity within a primary population than between primary populations. This is logical if you think about it. We all know that a lack of genetic diversity causes inbreeding. when cousins marry cousins, right? We all know that without diverse genetics, we get inbred. And we all know that inbreeding causes mutations. We all know that that causes problems, right? We've all seen it. We've all heard it. Like, it's illegal, right? Because if your genes are too close together and you're having babies, it can cause mutations, right? So within a primary population, if everybody's genes are the same, we're all mutated, right? Like, it's going to be bad news. So you have more genetic diversity within your primary population, meaning that you are going to be more genetically diverse from your next door neighbor, even if both of your families have lived there for 1,000 years, then you are going to be genetically diverse from somebody in an entirely different primary population. Now, I'm going to put this into some small numbers, easy for me to explain, so that it's a little bit more understood fully, right? If the entire of the human genome is 100 genes, and every human gets 25 genes, you might have genes 1 from 25, and your next door neighbor might have genes 75 through 100. And say that you're a member of the Khoi population of South Africa. Somebody in Sweden whose family has been there for 1,000 years might have genes 1 through 25. You're more likely to have the same genes as somebody in a different primary population than you are your next door neighbor. When we're looking at that, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to be different within your population, right? And when we're looking at that, we can see that the newer science that is being delivered on every level tells us Black people don't have heart problems. Black people have been redlined within the United States into spaces that the chemicals within the space cause heart conditions. Turtle Island Indigenous people, Native Americans within the United States are not prone to diabetes because of their genes. They're prone to diabetes because they've been force-fed overly processed food and starved and put through experiments for their nutrition experiments, right? They aren't prone to diabetes because of their genes. They're prone to diabetes because of what has been inflicted upon them, right? So when we look at that, we can see that our entire thought process of how genetics is at play kind of shifts and changes as well, right? We see that race became the next level of othering in the 1850s, 1860s. When we see the theory of evolution is wrote, when we see our first Neanderthal, how we see race becoming this level of othering and the invention of the idea of race is we see people claiming to be scientists, and they were for their day, using artistic tools and mathematic tools, and taking measurements and painting a bunch of colors on a sheet of paper and holding it up next to somebody's face, and comparing the color of your eyes, and putting a pencil in somebody's hair to see if it will fall out, right? We see these very non-scientific experiments done to try and prove science, right? And when we see that this happens, we see who is starting it is absolutely not only Europeans, but eugenics is very much started by Americans, right? Again, my words. And I want to say it's Jefferson, but I can't remember. And I don't know. It's not. It's like, it's one of the ones that was really smart, and Jefferson wasn't. He was just an ass. One of the really smart founding fathers actually helped develop the theory of eugenics. We see that the theory of eugenics has been used within the United States almost since its start, right? We see that before it became a theory, it was being used within the United States. And we see that the theory of eugenics has stayed in play throughout the entire time. The theory of eugenics is really actually still in play in some areas, right? So it wasn't until the mid 60s when the Supreme Court took stated that people can marry outside their race, right? Up until 63 and Loving versus the Supreme Court, right? Or Loving versus the state of Virginia, you couldn't marry outside your race, right? You see, and I want to say it is Mia, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And I want it, but at the same point, like I can't, like, I just can't. It's just not forming fully in my brain to even part of it. So when we see, hold on a second. When we see this, we see that even today, the theory of eugenics, the different things that were done within the pathways of eugenics and are continuing to be done within the pathways of eugenics are actually in force. And we see them very big on the news. We just ignore them, like ripping unwilling, like taking wombs at the border, right? Like the forced hysterectomies along the border, forced sterilization along the border. And forced sterilization is something that they state that they outlawed among Indigenous people in Turtle Island in 1978, the year I was born. But there are people that I know who are my age who have had forced sterilization done to them, right? So we still see that eugenics is still very much in play. Othering has kind of moved on a little bit. It's still there within the theory of race, and within that, like, it still uses color to other. It still uses phenotype to other without realizing that genotype has nothing to do with phenotype. But has moved on a little bit and included some other things. And today we really see othering is based on immigration and houselessness. There's a huge amount of othering based on immigration and houselessness right now. And when we see this othering based on immigration and houselessness, we see that it helps. It helps the current God King, to maintain control by not only othering who's in your society, but teaching you that you don't need to nurture and you don't need to provide communal support, right? There is this concept that, if you're not working for it, you shouldn't have it, right? Housing, our houseless people are the problem, right? Or this lack of understanding that houselessness is forced on every single person that's in that space. There's nobody who would rather be there, right? So we are teaching within that othering now this lack of care for community, this lack of nurturing, this lack of providing, this lack of communal thought, right? This lack of community is so important to us as a species. It is more important to us than it is to any other species. It takes community to nurture a child from newborn to their full brain development. At 25, we have 5 stages of brain development, and we need nurture through all of those. And it takes a community to do that, right? And since we have to have a community to do that, the more they remove community from us, the worse it gets for us. And it keeps us in this lower down space more and more and more. And then we get to the point where we have so many people who are hating on each other constantly. Like the lateral violence that we see within marginalized communities that is, so many times I see people who are trying to help end what's going on, right? Help change what's going on. And I've seen it on the streets, and I've seen it on social media. I tend to see it a little bit less in, spaces that are deemed more communal, right? Or where that thought process is put out at first. Yet we see that there's a lot of attack of each other instead of attack of the top, right? There's a lot of attack of each other instead of tearing down the system that keeps us harmed, okay? Now, of course, I don't want to go too deep into burning it to the ground because we're on TikTok, all right? But we need to understand that othering, that, vitriol and hate that we are putting into anything other than what's keeping us suppressed is what's keeping us suppressed, right? Hate the hate, stop with that, right? Again, my brain today. And that's really it. It's we're living in a time and in a space where 10,000 years of this has gotten us to the point where we're done, right? It took 10,000 years. We call it late stage capitalism. Yet to do that, we'd have to acknowledge that capitalism is inherent in anything where your rights are based on what you can earn for somebody else. So capitalism is inherent as far back as, our first god kings, who are keeping people, paying them in grain so that they can be alive, right? When your right to a space to live, when your right to a home, the simple right to a home, is controlled by what you can earn for somebody else in any way, shape, or form, that is capitalism. So when we talk about late stage capitalism, we have to understand that it's 10,000 years. It's not 100. It's not 500. It's not 1,000. It's 10,000 years, because capitalism is absolutely the exchange of your labor to somebody else so that you have enough so that you can have a piece of land to live on, or not even a piece of land, but just a place to lay your head, right? Just a home, just a space, right? So we have to really get to a point where we're seeing that on a broader scale to shut it down. And there's different ways that we can do that. I am always going to be on the land backside, returning tending and governance to Indigenous people across the globe. Not only will that end the climate destruction that Western-based agriculture has caused, not only will it end the end of our species being alive, because the planet's not going anywhere, we are, because we fucked up. It will also return us to a communal nurturing thought process. And because when we look at an animistic sense, which, again, nothing is monolithic, right? I don't want to state that anybody is monolithic or any community is monolithic. Therefore, I'm not going to state that Indigenous, actually, one of the definitions of Indigenous is animistic. One of the UN definitions of Indigenous is animistic, because animism is spiritual connection, communal connection to the land, right? And so that is underneath one of the definitions. So I will state this. So returning tending and governance to Indigenous people across the globe returns us to an animistic sense of connection with the land. And that animistic sense of connection with the land is a thought process of reciprocity and of tending, right? Our space in the biome, and we started here talking about the biome and how Western-based agriculture just takes and rips out the biome. Our space in the biome, what we adapted to become as a species, who we are as a species, what we become as a species is, or not what we become, why we became a species, right, is 100% the fact that we can tend the biome. Every animal in the biome adapts the biome. Every single animal in the biome adapts themselves to the biome and adapts the biome. Every single plant in the biome adapts themselves to the biome and adapts the biome. We see that a beaver has built his adaptation the same way for thousands and thousands of years. And there are other animals out there who have the same types of adaptations, whether their adaptation is their home, like they build a burrow or a den, right? Or whether their alerts, or whether their adaptation is tools, like corvids using tools or primates using tools, right? We adapt our adaptations, right? We take the adaptation of the beaver's dam and we adapt it further. When we adapt our adaptations, this is 100% so that we can tend the biome. so that we can look at the biome around us and see the need that needs to be filled, see the need that needs to be met. This is our niche. This is our space. And if we can return ourselves to a space of tending and governance, if we can return our, not governance, tending and reciprocity, if we can return ourselves as a species to that concept, which is the concept that we had for 300,000 years. We've only been in this ship for 10,000. So 290,000 years, and not everybody's lost it, right? If we can return our concept to the understanding of science that we are a part of the biome, oh, I think I might be banned. Or maybe it's pausing me. Huh. It wants me to verify. We have detected inactivity during your current live. Complete the verification to continue. I don't know if it's unable to verify. Let's see. It's going weird on me. The missing link. So the nearest that we found one so far. We think that it is more there are missing links than a missing link, right? The one that we have found so far is Graciopithecus freybergi. And Graciopithecus freybergi was found in Greece. And all we have of them is a jawbone. And we can see with this jawbone, the start of our... Okay, so I'm going to say this, but my brain is telling me that I can't remember, and so I'm not sure. So we have 5 like lumps on our teeth, right? And our molars have 4 prongs that go in my brain. This is indicative of an upright walker, or of somebody who is in the process of becoming an upright walker. So Graciopithecus freybergi, he has teeth that have the 4-pronged molar and the 5, and I can't remember the words right now, the 5 bumps on the top of the teeth. Roots, thank you. My brain. So having the 4 roots is a sign of an upright walker, and then having the, and I want to say it's cuspids, but I don't think that's it. But the 4 bumps on the top, these are signs of somebody who walks upright. And we see with Graciopithecus freybergi that there is, and they're not signs of fully upright, but like on the path, right? Because we see them in other ancestors who weren't quite upright, but they're the first that we see them in Greece. And so that's at 7.5 million years ago, if I remember correctly. And then we see our first, who we think is fully upright, at 7,000 years ago. So the first one was in Greece. The second one is in Chad. It was just found in a lake bed in Chad, and that's Sahelanthropithecus tadici. And we had found other bones of him and thought that he was probably fully upright or halfway there. And then we found his skull, and if I remember correctly, his skull shows that he's not actually fully upright because where the foramen magnum is. So how we know by the skull whether or not somebody is an upright walker is where the hole that your spine comes out of and your nerves come out of is. In your dog or your cat, somebody who walks on all 4s, we see that hole is on the back of the head where my ponytail is, right? It's back there so that their spine can go back and they have their 4 legs. On somebody who walks upright, we see that the foramen magnum has gone from the back of the skull down to your foramen magnum is really kind of right behind your ear. These are all muscular attachments. You can kind of feel where your skull comes up like this or it comes out like this, but really right behind your ear is where your foramen magnum is, right? Maybe just a little bit back, maybe right behind this tendon right? And so we see in Sahelanthropithecus tadici that the foramen magnum has moved down almost to the bottom, but not quite. So we think that Graciopithecus freybergi was a possible missing link. And again, this is in Greece at 7.5 million years ago. And then we actually have some footprints in Greece at 6.5 million years ago to 7 million years ago that are upright, that and they're like human footprints, right? Almost. And that's I don't remember the name of the island in Greece, but it's an island. It's an island actually in the Mediterranean, like not an island in Greece, but an island in the Mediterranean. So that's slightly after or up to the same point that we see Sahelanthropithecus tadici in South Africa. So that's where we see that start in that transition. I know that we think that there's other missing links out there. We're just not exactly sure yet, right? We just haven't found them. What do we know about the ghost species in Turtle Island? So I cannot find an article anymore on that one that I can publish or put up. I've got an article somewhere in my school paperwork because it's something that my professor had told us about. When we're looking at, I have some articles on some of the other ghost species on the website, just for your article information, just for sourcing. From what I know about, what we know about ghost species, really the information is just real little. Like we don't have a lot of information about what they are. And the reason, or what we might call that species. And the reason is it's just the amount of genetic material that we're finding in the DNA. So when we look at the ghost species within Turtle Island indigenous people, my memory is that we're looking at like 1% or under, and that it's not in every single person across Turtle Island and Abya Yala. It is in a lot of nations, just not in every nation, right? And that it's just not the genetic material that we see within us is not genetic material that we see in anybody anywhere else, basically. And so that's going to be the same thing that we see within the ghost species in Australia. We're not seeing that genetic material in anybody anywhere else. And the same thing. So even though the Kwe have the entirety of the human genome, they have 3 ghost species as well within them. But we don't see those ghost species in anybody else. The 6th one, we only see in Neanderthal and Denisovan. And the 7th one, I don't know yet where we see it because it's a later article that came out when the 7th species that we have, HLD6, came out. Or it's in that article on HLD6. So when we're looking at a ghost species here in Turtle Island that is unique and it doesn't show up in any Turtle Island and Abya Yala, and it doesn't show up in anybody else, what it means is we came in contact with them in a space that nobody else came in contact with them, right? This would mean that it's a species that's here, right? If it was a species anywhere else, other people would have likely come in contact with them, right? When we're looking at the sites in Turtle Island, I'm on my YouTube. I have a tab on the website that I have called Rewriting the Western Hemisphere. And pre-Sapiens find in Western sites. I think I have 3 on here. Yeah, okay. And I don't think I think I've heard, but haven't like been able to find a couple other sites. But these are the ones that I have that predate. Well, one of them predates Homo sapien, kind of, right? And the other ones, well, so what we know now of Homo sapiens is that our species speciates in convergence. We speciate through coming together through many different species of Homo erectus subspecies coming together and Homo erectus coming together. And it is this convergence that creates Homo sapien. Homo sapiens, I got bitched at for not using the S at sapiens because I don't care about not vocabulary, but pronunciation and stuff. So I'm trying to make sure that I am correcting the way that I say that because it does bother some people that I don't say it correctly. So that's why you're hearing me try and correct myself. So sapiens, when we and again, it's not like I didn't learn it like that. I just don't care enough about pronunciation usually, but I do see that some people do. So I'm trying to do my better. When we look at sapiens, we see that their speciation through convergence starts at 300,000 years ago. Jebel Irad at northern or in Morocco, we see is 300,000 years old. And we see a couple in Ethiopia at 260,000 years ago. So you see the start this long ago. What we don't see is the settling into one species until later. Now, what this means is if you've got a band that's Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis and Homo antecessor and Homo ergaster and a Homo sapiens child is born, that's one child among, probably 30 people, right? When you start to see Homo sapiens actually breeding with other Homo sapiens, when you start to see communities who are no one's whole one species at this time that we can find evidence of, like just a single species lives just alone by themselves. Everybody's a bunch of mix of different species because that's how we are. When we see Homo sapiens becoming an own interbreeding group within a community is when you're going to start seeing it become a settled species. And when you start to see children who so early Homo sapiens are going to have maybe a flatter forehead, lower forehead, or a longer skull, or the start of a chin, but not a whole chin. This is the distinguishing factor for Homo sapien right here. This and our flat face, right? But we see flat face and some other things. We just don't see the chin in anything else. So the mental eminence on your chin is why we're sapiens, because it means wise. So when we see the full settling into a species is between 125 to 135,000 years ago currently. All of this is within the last year. All this, all this information is coming out within the last year. So we need to also understand that it may change within 6 months. It may change within 5 years. This is our current understanding of it. So we see that Homo sapiens really currently we see that they solidify as a species of their own between 125 to 135,000 years ago. We've already seen sapien finds in the Arabian Peninsula by this time. We see that sapiens and Neanderthals are living side by side in the Arabian Peninsula at this time and interacting, or by this time interacting. So we see that sapiens not being their own species outside, not being their own species, period, really until 125 to 135,000 years ago. Any find that we're seeing in Turtle Island or in Abiyala that is 200,000 years ago or 250,000 years ago are not going to be Homo sapiens. And the same thing for the find that's at 130,000 years ago. So the three finds that we have in Turtle Island and Abiyala that I have, been able to compile. Again, I've heard a couple others, I'm trying to compile more information. We have Heot Loko in, I butcher words, especially when I'm not doing good. I apologize to anybody for my butchering. Heot Loko in Valasquel, Mexico, and it has 3 datings on it. All of them are before 40,000 years ago. And I think the most recent, not most recent as in when they dated it, but when I think it is, most recent dating is 50,000 years ago. The most recent dating on it, though, is 250,000 years ago, the most recent that they've taken. And they've also got a dating on it at 800,000 years ago. So this is one site that's extremely old. They have 3 different dates on it. The next one that we have here is the Calico site. And the Calico site is actually was worked on by Leakey. And the Calico site dates to 200,000 years ago. And so Leakey is like one of the top archaeologists throughout history. The Calico site and his dating of the Calico site actually caused an uproar, and like it caused a lot of discreditation. Not that they ever proved him wrong, but the Calico site is dated to 200,000 years ago, and that is in California. And then the Cerruti Mastodon site. Now, you will hear people state that this is not a correct site. Anybody who's stating it's not a correct site hasn't actually looked at the evidence. There's a paper presented by the head of singing in the background, by the head of anthropology I think it was the head of orientology. The Cerruti Mastodon site was a site that was originally just thought of to be just another mastodon. And so paleontologists, that's what it is. The paleontologist from the San Diego Natural History Museum went out and was setting it for that and found stone tools. And when he found stone tools, he ended up calling in somebody else who was a paleoanthropologist. So between the two of them and a wide variety from many different fields, we have a whole bunch of people who have come together to do testing to make sure that all the dates are correct, that everything's correct. And the Cerruti Mastodon site is 130,000 years old, and it's in San Diego, California. And it is a juvenile mastodon who was butchered at death. And there's a few ways we can tell that he was butchered at death, because you will be told, well, that's just because they broke the bones when the backhoes dug them up, right? You can tell from the testing that they have done, they can tell that the reason that we can tell that they were broken on death because of the fact that bone breaks differently when it's wet than when it's dry. Think of it like if you get a piece of bread and you toast it and you butter it, as opposed to if you get a piece of bread and you toast it and you don't butter it. The piece of bread that is buttered, when you try and break it, it's going to rip and it's going to tear a lot more. A piece of bread that's just dry, when you break it, it's not going to, you're going to have going off, and but it's not going to be as jagged edge. It's not going to rip and tear as much. Or if you take that piece of bread that's been buttered and you let it sit and dry, right? Or you then dry it, it's going to be easy to break, and it's not going to have as jagged of edges. When we're looking at mastodon bones, they're obviously broken at time of death because of the way the fracture patterns are. I froze again, everybody. Let me see if it's going to come back. Let me see if I can. Hoping. Yeah, I'm so sorry, everybody. TikTok hates me. I'm really not sure why. I really don't know what's going on. Might be my internet. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but it's really driving me insane. So, we know that the Cerruti Mastodon bones were broken at kill because of the fact that the fracture patterns on them are fracture patterns that you're going to see with wet bones. Now, they even with this, they even did what we call experimental archaeology. experimental archaeology is a field that actually has been formed within the last like 20 years. And what it is they take, like, if you find beer, you take the because we have found, like in Egypt, we have found amphora with beer in them in the bottom, and they've been buried, right? And so there's a crust of the beer down in the bottom. So they can take that and they analyze it. And by analyzing it, they try and figure out how it was made or what things were put into the beer to make it. And then they try to recreate it. So experimental archaeology works to recreate things, to prove how they were done, or to look at how they were done, or like if somebody is smelting steel, like they might go through several different ways to try and figure out how Damascus was made, right? We know it was folded, but what's the other things that need to be done, right? So we see experimental archaeology used at the Cerruti Macedon site as well. And Cerruti Macedon site is 130,000 years old. It is refuted, but not debunked, because the people who are refuting it are not refuting it based on evidence, right? So the people who did the work, which are from many different fields, again, which is how most scientific journal papers are written. You take people from many different fields and you come collaborate to find information together. Because I don't know crap about geography or geology, so I need somebody who knows geology to tell me where the water levels were 100,000 years ago, right? So many different people coming together to create a paper. The many different people coming together to create the paper have studied this, they've worked with it, they've looked at it. All the people who are debunking them won't even go and look at the evidence. The only thing that they've done is read the paper, if they've read the paper through. And they're all screaming that it can't be true, but they legitimately, like if you go to San Diego Museum's, Natural History Museum's website, there is a whole expert on the Cerruti Macedon and how it's really been really irritating for the scientists in the field, because they're being told that they're lying, but nobody will even come and examine the evidence. Nobody will even come and look. You're lying because I've never seen it, but I won't even bother to try and come and see it, right? So it hasn't been debunked because nobody's actually done any work to debunk it. They're just screaming lies at the top of their lung. So that's 130,000 years old in California. Now, I was asked about the ghost species, and we're talking about the ghost species. Why does this relate? This is evidence of Homo erectus making it here and speciating here. And then, like the descendant species of Homo erectus, like Neanderthal and Denisovan, intermixed with us, sapiens intermixing with this descendant species and probably enveloping them within them and adapting to the surroundings, becoming a one community with them, like they had done with everybody else at that time of our history, and becoming a part of that community. And therefore those genes are living on. We see that in all these species that speciated outside of Africa from Homo erectus, the species were all very small. We're the largest population. We have the largest population. And even 100,000 years ago, even 50,000 years ago, we have the largest population of other species, or of largest population out of the other Homo species. So with that, we see that everywhere that Homo erectus went and speciated, the species that they speciated into, like Neanderthal and Denisovan, were small species. The Neanderthal, by the time we come in contact with them, are pretty, they're pretty inbred. Like you see that like uncle and niece are marrying, cousins are marrying, because there's just not enough of them left. There's like roughly 10,000 of them left by the time we come in contact with them. Well, okay, so there's several times that we come in contact with them, but by the time the last contact, where everybody is like, oh, this is when it is. It's weird because people are like, oh, well, we intermixed with them 50,000 years ago, but Neanderthal had our Y DNA at 200,000 years ago. So we were mixing with Neanderthal before that. Neanderthal doesn't have a Y DNA. We haven't found a Neanderthal Y DNA yet. We have found a Denisovan Y DNA in Neanderthals, and we have found a Sapiens Y DNA in Neanderthals, but we haven't found a Y DNA from Neanderthal. And so we definitely had to be mixing with them before that, right? This is also some people's thought process of why we're just more closely related as a species to Neanderthals, right? Inbreeding doesn't speciate anything. Speciation comes from adaptation to an environment, and usually happens when you're isolated from the rest of your community. With us, though, it came from convergence. So there's about 5 different ways that you can speciate. And most of those ways of speciation are involving being a singular community, and a part of your community is separated for one reason or another. And you can see that some of those methods of speciation are parallel. So the two communities that are separated, they'll like evolve along the same scale. Or you'll see that some of those speciations are vastly different. So you might see somebody who's isolated on an island who shrinks, right? But speciation is all about adaptation to the environment, and what is needed by the environment and every animal. When we're looking at speciation through convergence, which is how we speciated, which is new information that's out there, that speciation through convergence is different subspecies or different species of Homo. So subspecies of Homo erectus or different species of Homo, depending on what side of anthropology you are in that debate, all living together in communities. And that communal living of several different species means that, you might have a antecessor and an ergaster, and their child is a sapiens. And you might have an erectus and a heidelbergensis, and their child is a sapiens. And you might have a half heidelbergensis, half ergaster, who mates with a half antecessor, half erectus, and their child is a sapiens, right? And so our speciation comes through many different species coming together and converging, but speciation never comes from inbreeding. Inbreeding kills us out. Inbreeding is a toxic thing that actually creates toxic mutations within our bodies, and those toxic mutations within our bodies are within any species body. A species won't speciate with something that's toxic to its speciation, right? Toxic to its time on Earth. I'm not going to speciate not being able to breathe air if I live in a space that I have to breathe air, right? Like so when we are looking at these sites here in Turtle Island, they predate when sapiens is really even a species. So they would be a different species. And again, we see that wherever Homo erectus makes it across the planet and speciates across the planet. And when we look at this, let's go over a couple of sites that may not be very commonly aware of, right? So let me first go over like the different species that we know come out of. So Homo erectus itself is a species. There are several different species that we talk about that within paleoanthropology, part of paleoanthropology believes they're separate species, and part of paleoanthropology believes are just different members of one species, and part of paleoanthropology believes they're subspecies of a species. So Homo heidelbergensis, Homo antecessor, Homo ergaster, these are all considered to be like subspecies, or there's debate on who they are. But we do know that if they are not erectus, members of erectus species, that they do come from erectus. We see that erectus is the first to leave Africa of those who walk upright. We see that at 1.8 million years ago, or 1.9 million years ago, which is roughly 100,000 years after our first evidence of them, Homo erectus is seen in Georgia, the city, not the state, the country, not the state. And you may have seen this news article like 2 years ago that came across, oh my God, a human tooth in Georgia 1.8 million years ago. And it is absolutely a human tooth, because any species underneath the genus Homo is human. Homo means human. It is, though, not Homo sapiens tooth. So it is a Homo erectus tooth. We see that erectus makes it outside of Africa at that point, because Homo erectus is the first expediently bipedal species that we see. We get the expedient bipedalism that we have from them, our ability to walk upright and move upright on a long-term basis. And the way that our feet move for that upright walking gives us the ability to really move across the planet. Well, it also gave Homo erectus the ability to move across the planet. The first species that we found that speciated from any other species, or that was different than us, was Neanderthal. After Neanderthal, we started to find, other species. We found Erectus, we found Heidelbergensis. We believed that these species, and carbon dating shows these species were not around when we were around, but we've always believed and thought that Neanderthal was either, a member of our species or an ancestor of our species, or was around when we were around. That was in 1800s. God, I have it off the top of my head, but not right now because I'm mixing it. 1850 or 1860, because I'm mixing it with BJ581, which is 1888. So we see Neanderthal in the 1850s. We see that in 2003, we see our other species that we believe lives at the same time frame that we do. All the other species that we found outside of that and outside of Neanderthal, all the carbon dating shows us as we are not, and it's not just carbon dating anymore. Now they're retesting everything. They're doing strontium isotope testing. They're doing different forms of testing that either back up the carbon dating or to kind of replace the carbon dating. So when we're looking at these other species, at that time it was carbon dating. We knew that these other species weren't around when we were around, except for Neanderthal. In 2003, we find Homo florensis on the island of Flores in Indonesia. This is our first evidence, though not really even taken at the time, but first evidence that Homo erectus is making it across water. And the reason this is our first evidence that Homo erectus is making it across water is because the island of Flores in Indonesia has always, or is in the Wallace Trench. And the Wallace Trench is a very deep space between two continental shelves. And it's never, the islands within it have never been accessible by land, right? Because it's always been water. It's so deep that during different sea level changes, it's always been water. So an island in the middle of it has always been an island in the middle of it. So we know that Homo erectus had to cross water to get there. That's in 2003. In about 2010, after we, Sponte Pablo uses polymerase chain reaction, PCR to sequence the first ancient DNA, full genome ancient DNA from Neanderthal. In the working of that, they're also sequencing other bones within the Denisova cave in Russia, which is littered with bones none more than 2 inches. And in testing another bone, phalangia, fingertip, they find an entirely new species, and that's Homo denisovan. After Homo denisovan, about 2 years after that, we find Homo naledi. And Homo naledi is in South Africa. I recommend Cave of Bones, Unexplained or Unknown Cave of Bones on Netflix. It is Lee Berger, who is the head paleoanthropologist on the Naledi site in South Africa, which is the Rising Star Caves in South Africa outside Johannesburg. He does an entire thing on them. They're amazing. Homo naledi is top peak, like amazeballs. They're 335,000 years ago to 225,000 years ago. They were here before us, and they have the same brain shape that we didn't get until 40,000 years ago. And they have art, and they bury their dead. And they use fire in ways that we haven't seen in other species prior to like 90,000 years ago. So Naledi, and then after Naledi in 2012, we find, let me make sure my count is right really quick. Yeah, okay, so after that, we find Homo luzonensis in the island of Luzon in the Philippines. This is another one where you have to cross water to get to because it is below the Wallace Trench. So even when we had Sunda and Sunda, you would have to have crossed water to get to this space. After Homo luzonensis, or right around the same time, Homo longi is a skull cap, just the top of the skull, that we found in the 70s in China, in Long Cave in China. And we have thought that, we thought it was us, I think, or something like that. And then like they were retesting the time frame and found out that it's not. And they do believe it might be Denisovan, but we don't have a skull cap from Denisova. So we're not sure if it's Denisovan or if it's a whole new species. And then last year, the very end of last year, they came out, there came a paper on a new species that they found, HLD6, Holongdong Cave, and the 6th grave in Holongdong Cave. So HLD6. And this one is 300,000 years ago, and it might end up up turning everything over. Like it might end up changing everything, because Hulongdong 6, HLD 6 has the start of a chin, and it has a flat face. Now it has the molar gap between the last molar and the mandible that Erectus and Neanderthal and everybody else has. It has a lower forehead, it has some very Erectus facial features or skull features, and yet it also has some early, like some questionable features that look almost like Homo sapiens features. And so because of that, it might end up changing a lot of stuff. This is only a few months old though, but HLD6, it hasn't even been named. And then with that article, or with that publication, came another ghost species. So when we're looking at the fossil record, we can see in the fossil record that we can see actual people in all of these spaces. And in 2 of these spaces, there was a necessity to cross water to get there. When we look at the fossil record without bones, we see the Cerruti Mastodon site here in Turtle Island at 130,000 years ago. And we see in Australia the Moyhill site came out. The Moyhill site in Australia, that's 120,000 years ago. And again, as we were just discussing, Homo sapiens is not making it out of the Arabian Peninsula area or Homo sapiens is not speciated as a whole species until 125 to 135,000 years ago. So both of these would not be Homo sapien sites. The one in San Diego, we've gone over a little bit. The one in the Moyhill site in Australia is fire-cracked rock and evidence of fire and food items. Fire-cracked rock is evidence of reheating rock, so intentional fire. When we're looking at those, they all show the ability to get to different spaces, and they all show the fact that everywhere that Homo erectus goes to and speciates, their species are small. We don't really have a whole lot of knowledge of Denisovan's genetic divergence, and we've only really found like one cave with them so far. So we don't know just how big their species was, but we do believe that they were a smaller species and that they spent a lot of time really interacting with Neanderthals. When we look at Homo florensis, the Homo florensis site is a cave that has like 60 people in it, basically. And that's the only site that we have on Homo florensis. There is some evidence that Homo florensis might actually still be alive. And the guy who discovered the site and who's been working on the site for the last 20 years is actually trying to find out more information or try and see, because indigenous conversation in the area states that they've been seen as recently as 1950s. What we do know of them, though, is that they're not only a very small species in stature. This is our hobbit species. They're like 3'8" at their height, and they have large feet, right? So not only are they small in stature due to island dwarfism, but they're a small member species. Like there's not very many of them. We haven't gotten DNA out of them. We probably won't because of the conditions. It's hot and wet, and hot and wet does not preserve DNA. Luzonzensis is a small species to what we know so far. This also is probably a result of island dwarfism on both of them. Both of them have had island dwarfism affect their height, because Homo luzonzensis is like 4'5" or something like that at its height. Though I haven't heard evidence that they have big feet. So, and then when we look at the Cerruti Mastodon site here within San Diego, California, and again, there are 3 sites here that predate 1,000 years ago, and this is just one of them because it is the most confirmed one at this point, or it is the one where any debate isn't even a logical debate at this point, right? Nobody's even done any other testing at this point. So when we look at the Cerruti Mastodon site, nobody's done testing despite being offered to do testing. Let me clarify that point. When we look at the Cerruti Mastodon site, it is evidence of somebody being here prior. Now, again, if we see Homo erectus is making it everywhere, makes total logical sense. If we see that in the 2 spaces that Homo erectus makes, that's very small space, like the islands of the South Pacific of Flores and Luzon, that they have shrunk because of island dwarfism, then there's something called island giganticism. that is the opposite of island dwarfism. So island dwarfism is when you are in a small space and there's not a lot of predators and there is not a lot of nutrient or food. Your species will adapt the space by shrinking. When you are in a large space with large predators and a lot of food, your species will grow in height. Now we see this. That's why we have mastodons. We see this in North America. We see mammoths. We see everything going towards giganticism in North America, right? We see that there is a lot of species that became gigantic within North America, right? So I don't think so much within South America. I'd have to look at that actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But in Turtle Island, we see that there's a lot of giganticism among the animals within Turtle Island. So it would make sense that any species of Homo erectus that's speciated here, or from Homo erectus here, would go towards a larger size. I do believe that this would confirm a lot of knowledge that has been passed down by generation and generation. I don't know, that's just my supposed belief on that. Yet we do know that Homo erectus speciated here. Their size may be up for debate. They are not, right? Having come here, they are not up for debate. I mean, people will try, but we do know that they made it here. We do know that they speciated here. And we do know that there is a ghost species within Turtle Island and Abayalian indigenous DNA, which is very likely connected to the Cerruti Mastodon site. Again, we haven't found any bones of people, at least not since we started not trashing the bones of people, right? We haven't found any bones of people recently since, we kind of changed our tune on being assholes about it. So we don't have evidence within archaeology and anthropology of bones of people here before that date yet. That doesn't mean we won't. We may, right? There's so much stuff that's come out within the last 5 years, within the last 10 years. 20 years ago, 21 years ago, it was us and Neanderthals, and that was it. And now it's us and 14 other species, because we have 7 that we've seen in the fossil record and 7 that we see within our DNA and within Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. So that means us plus 14 other species. So tomorrow will change. We'll have more information, right? There'll be something new tomorrow about it, which will be fun, right? Something new to see. So that goes a little bit into science and medicine. No, that's really touching mainly on the ghost species and the cousin species, right? I term these our cousin species just for understanding of, because the family tree is a web. Like the more and more we learn, the more and more we learn that it's not structured. It's not linear. It doesn't work like that. Nothing in this world works like that, right? Again, indigenous knowledge should have been confirmed a long time ago, right? So the more and more we learn about it, the more and more we see that it is not what we thought, that it is a web, right? That it is. And so when I look at it like grandfather Homo erectus or grandmother Homo erectus, and then, aunties and uncles and our parents, and who even knows, because our parents were all of them, right? Our parents weren't just one of them. Our parents were all of them, right? And so our aunties and uncles and our parents, right, are maybe our alleo-parenting, right? So maybe our alleo-parents. And then, that even makes it more of our siblings and our cousins, doesn't it, right? So when we look at that, I look at these other species that we lived alongside as our family, right? Not as even being that distantly connected as our family. That makes sense. No, I think I saw what was going on. Thank you. There's been a couple of the colonizers need to appropriate. There's been a couple of people that I have spotted recently that I have tried to help understand a little bit differently, that come by names like that, right? You see somebody who's talking about frequencies and vibrations, and their name is white buffalo calf child or white buffalo calf woman, and then they're like, the tarot cards are out and shit like that. So I've seen a couple. And so I think that was actually one of them. When I was noticing the comments, that's why I was kind of ignoring, because I thought that was another one of the people whose lives are, videos I've actually had to go to, and, I've been asked to go to and say something because people have noticed and are seen. And I've been like, oh, okay, yeah. But anybody's reference, if anybody calls themselves white buffalo calf woman, they are not Indigenous on any level. None whatsoever. No Indigenous person would do that. Just saying. So those are the different species around us, right? And the different species that we were. Lucy was lonely still like a bare branch. That's awesome. I love that cognition in my brain, right? That image in my brain. Well, now we know that. So Lucy kind of created Homo erectus. So now we know, like in the last year, we found out that Lucy and Pranthropus boisei, who we also now know is our first tool maker, not Homo erectus, and Homo erectus came together, and it is the three of them, or not erectus, habilis, right? Up until last year, we thought Homo habilis was our first tool maker. That's why habilis handy, and Homo man, so handyman. But in the last year, we realized that Pranthropus boisei, or nutcracker man, Australopithecus africanus, or Lucy, and Homo habilis came together, and they are how Homo erectus was created. So that really actually gives a lot of rise to the understanding with Homo naledi, because when you look at Homo naledi, you see that Homo naledi actually is a combination, right, of a couple of different species, because you see that Homo naledi kind of proves that evolution isn't linear. You see that they have the fully bipedal, expedient bipedal, upright walking thing that Erectus has, but that their upper body is kind of like more like Australopithecine, so more like Lucy, so that they can actually climb better, but that their brain is really advanced. Small brain space, but really advanced thought, and the shape is really advanced, because the globular, lobal, or round brain that we have now doesn't come about until much later. And we see that Naledi has that. And so it's almost like that's another convergence, right? That's another species that comes from many different species coming together as well, right? I am going to go. This has worked semi-decently. We've been on for like an hour and 45 minutes. Well, TikTok's been back and forth, but YouTube's been on for that long. And I'm going to go ahead and go. I always try and close us out specifically, and so I want to go ahead and do that today. We've talked a little bit in the beginning, about how we are communal and how we are nurturing. How do I know that biologically, right? I state that this is a biological necessity frequently. And so how do I know that? The reason that I know that we're communal biologically is because we must have assistance in our childbirth. We have what we call mandatory midwifery. The only other species that's ever had mandatory midwifery was Neanderthal. We have mandatory midwifery because of the way our head is shaped, with the way our shoulders were shaped. It is all over on YouTube. If you've missed any of it, I have been streaming on YouTube this whole time, and YouTube hasn't actually crapped out like TikTok, so you'll find it all over there. The way our head is shaped and the way our shoulders are shaped, and the way that the pelvic outlet is shaped. The pelvic outlet is like this, and it's kind of tilted, right? And to get the infant's skull out, it has to go one way, and then to get the shoulders out, it has to turn. We start out as infants with our nose facing backwards, and we go a quarter turn to get our head through this canal, okay? And then we do another quarter turn to get our shoulders through the canal. This needs assistance for the most part. Now, some of us are flexible. I'm extremely flexible. I've been able to touch my cervix, right? Like, only for my doctors, right? But I'm extremely flexible. Some of us can do stuff like that. Trying to do it around a pregnant belly is a whole other thing. And every once in a while, you will find an extremely small baby, maybe with somebody who has broad hips and they don't need the midwifery. So before you come at me and tell me that, I have my baby on my own, glad he's alive, right? We need help giving birth to our children. We also need help raising our children. Now, why is this? We have more life stages between neonate, firstborn, and adult, fully formed brain, because these are brain development stages. We have more brain development stages. They call them life stages, but it's really about the life brain development, right? More brain development stages than any other species on the planet. Homo neanderthalis only had 4. We have 5. We have the longest adolescence and childhood, the longest need of being cared for of any species on this planet. And we are more unable to fend for ourselves enough to let somebody else fend for us than any other species on this planet. So to raise a child from birth to fully formed brain development, able to take care of themselves, we need more people than just us. We need a majority. There's plenty of studies that have shown it takes a village to raise a child, right? There are plenty of ways that we know this. It's, in fact, common knowledge that we try and ignore it. It takes many, many people to raise a child from neonate to adult. Even today, when you can go to your grocery store, when you have an employer in a daycare center, who's working the daycare center, who's at the checkout line at the grocery store. Even today, it takes multiple people to get you the things that you need to raise this child as a single parent. In a community prior to now, it is also going to take multiple people to raise this child, because you need somebody to stay in the house or the home or the cave or whatever it is with the child while people go out. And you need at least 10 people to hunt, because you're not going to hunt without ensuring your safety from other predators, which means you need multiple people to be watching your back. Same thing with gathering anything, because you need multiple people to make sure that while you're picking berries, there's not a bear coming through the berries, especially not a giant cave bear coming through the berries, right? And you also need people to make sure that your water needs are met, right? And then you also need people to make sure that any tool usage needs are met. So you need multiple people to provide the sustenance and nutrients and safety for the child, let alone having somebody who can keep an eye on the child to make sure that they, A, don't attract predators, and B, don't burn themselves to death by rolling into a fire, right? So you need multiple people. We are communal. Nurture and communal is the basis of who we are. All of those people have to nurture a child. You need Every human being knows multiple subjects, whether we want to admit it or not. Jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than the master of one. And we are all jacks of all trades. We all know multiple things. How do I know this? You know how to turn on and off your phone. You know how to drive your car, and you know how to go to your job. That's multiple fucking things, right? So every single human being knows multiple things, but no human being knows all the things. So to teach a child, you need multiple people knowing multiple things to encourage the brain growth, to encourage the development, to teach a child how to walk, to teach a child how to talk, but then teach a child how to hunt, but then teach a child how to gather, but then teach a child how to either, what is their creative, their passion? Do they really like hunting? Is that everything they like to do, and they're just on that all the time? Or do they like to hunt and they like to gather, but they really like to flint nap, right? You have to have multiple brain powers teaching multiple things, nurturing a child, right? We also have had multiple studies, like the Failure to Thrive studies in the 50s, where they took a room full of orphans that they gave attention to and a room full of orphans that they propped their bottles up. The room full of orphans, where all they did was prop their bottles up, had what we call failure to thrive. They died because nobody loved them. Nobody gave them attention. Nobody nurtured them. We know that nurture is a requirement. We live in a society, though, that teaches you that to nurture people, as we were talking about earlier, is a problem. Somehow they turned love into hate and hate into love. Somehow they have manipulated your thought and convinced you that simple acts of kindness are, in fact, acts of indecency. And because we live in a society where everybody is being taught that shit all the fucking time, we live in a society that has lost its nurture and has lost its community. And since your body biologically needs nurture and community, we live in a society that is making us all depressed and anxious, right? So if you're depressed and you're anxious, or you feel like there's a problem and you can't figure out what it is, you feel like something's wrong and you don't know what, you are having a healthy reaction to an unhealthy society. Because we need love and nurture to live, everybody who breathes has the right to life and is worthy of the basic necessities of the right to life. And the basic necessities of the right to life are to be nurtured. And so everybody being worthy of the basic necessities of the right to life means that you are worthy of love just by breathing. You are worthy of existence just by breathing. You are worthy of compassion. You are worthy of grace. You are worthy just by breathing. It doesn't matter what dollar you make for somebody else today. It doesn't matter what dollar you make for somebody who never even fucking knows your name today. You are worthy by existing. You are worthy by breathing. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of compassion. You are worthy of empathy. And you are worthy of community, because these are the things that we need for life. There's a lot of other things that you're worthy of, like a home to live in, and food and water, anything that is a basic necessity for life. You are worthy of just by breathing. So if nobody is giving you those things today, please remember to give them to yourself. Please give yourself grace. Please give yourself compassion. Please give yourself empathy. Those of us who are aware, those of us who are awake, we're the only thing that can change this. Those who don't have awareness of it can't change it. You must be aware of a problem to change it. And we froze. Ha, 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 ha. Hold on. I'll be right back to finish this shit. Thank you, TikTok, for sticking around, or YouTube for sticking around. Let's see if I can get it to go live again just for the last couple minutes. I love you. Thank you so much for being over there and watching still. It is giving me problems. Giving me problems. It would have to freeze there. You are worthy of love. You're worthy of grace. And if you're awake to the problem, you can help fix the problem, because those who are not awake from the problem can't do jack shit about it. You have to be aware that there is an issue. So not only are you worthy, not only are you deserving of love and grace and kindness and compassion, but you are a necessity to change. You are a necessity to ensure that this is gone, that we're not dealing with this anymore, that we get back to a space of love, nurture, and community. And I'm sure that that's coming out half and frozen. And I apologize, everybody. I don't know. I don't know. TikTok doesn't love me very much right now. Maybe it's the message. Maybe it's my face. Who knows? It's TikTok. Take care, everybody. Give yourselves love and grace today. And remember that I love you. Nobody else does. I think, first of all, if you think nobody else does, that you're lying to yourself. I have felt that many a time in my life. And when somebody forced me to go back and look at it, I was lying to myself. Okay. So if you think that nobody loves you, please remember you are lying to yourself. And then remember that I love you. I don't have to know you. You're another human being. I can feel your energy. I know you're there, right? Not to get all weird, but I love you and I need you and we all need you. Take care of yourself, everybody, and give yourself grace and love and compassion because it is a necessity and a staple, especially if nobody else is giving it to you. Take care. Love you all. Now it wants to work. Thank you so much for sticking around, YouTube. And thank you so much for being here. Take care, and I will see you later.